All right, this is podcast this is podcast number 2.5, and you can find this information in chapter 6, section 2 of your textbook. And what we're going to discuss in this podcast is changes in market equilibrium. There are certain factors that push a market into disequilibrium, and when a market is in disequilibrium, its natural tendency is to find equilibrium again, or find the happy place where consumers and producers agree. The first way that we can have a disequilibrium, which then causes a new equilibrium, is change in price. And this can happen when a company decides to raise the price. We can see demand go up or demand go down and supply go up, and now we have a disequilibrium. But what you need to understand is that the supply and demand curve do not shift when price changes. And we've talked about this a lot, but it's just movement along the curve when we're talking about a price change. The things that cause the supply and demand curves to then shift are going to be outside factors that a company or a producer or a consumer may bring into the situation to cause a new equilibrium point. When a new equilibrium price is defined, a new equilibrium quantity also has to be defined. When this happens, that's when you typically see one of the curves shift. An example of a change in price that causes a disequilibrium is a price ceiling. This is also a way that the government intervenes in the marketplace. A price ceiling is the maximum price that you can charge for an item. It's set below the equilibrium or the market price. Because what the government is saying is that, hey, the price you're charging for this is too much. So now we need to set the price below that point, because then it will be more affordable for consumers. An example of this could be rent. We did institute rent control at one point in our history, but the problem is that we have more people now that want to rent places, and not enough supply of homes, and so we end up having a shortage of housing. So the new equilibrium quantity becomes difficult to define because you have this shortage issue. And then this kind of cut off a little bit on the bottom here, but a good question to ask is, would you support a price ceiling on gasoline? We could set a price ceiling on gas and say, hey, you can only charge, $2.50 now for gas, and you can't go above that. But the problem is that we're going to have the risk of a shortage, and it takes away the free market flow of pricing, and so most people don't support that, even though it seems like it'd be great for the consumer, and that producers would still be making a profit. Here's an example of what the market can look like if we do institute a price ceiling. If you notice over here, this is the market without a price ceiling, and the market can supply 30,000 apartments if they charge $900. When we institute a price ceiling and we make the price $600 as the maximum amount that you can charge, we have an issue because the number of apartments that can be supplied at that price is only about 15,000, but there are a lot of people that really want apartments at that price, so then we have this shortage problem going on here. And really, one of the only ways to fix this problem is to either increase supply or ration out the apartments and say, hey, this is how you get into the apartment. And we kind of do that already with subsidized housing. The government sets a price control on that, and then we ration it out. We give it out to people who need it the most. So that kind of is an example of rent control. The second way that price can change equilibrium is with a price floor. This is also instituted by the government, except it's a minimum price that you can charge for something. So you would say you have to at least charge this much. This is the price that has to be set. This is usually set above the equilibrium or the market price, and yes, it does exist. It doesn't make sense to us. We don't really understand why the government would say, hey, you have to charge at least this much. But when we're looking at wages, producers have to supply, they have to pay you a price for your wage. And so minimum wage is set at a minimum price. You have to pay at least this amount for those wages. Unfortunately, minimum wage can cause a surplus of labor. So anytime you raise the minimum wage, you're going to have more people wanting to work, but companies are going to have to fire people probably, or cut back on hours because they don't have the revenue, or they may not have the money to pay all of those people. So it can cause a surplus of labor. So a question that you could ask yourself about this is, do you think the minimum is at an effective rate? Do you think the minimum wage is currently at an effective place in the market? It's debatable right now because there is a surplus of labor, and it could be caused by the minimum wage, but there are lots of other things that are causing unemployment in the U.S. too. Here's an example of what a minimum wage would look like. If you look, the current equilibrium could be $6.60, and at this point producers are willing to hire 4 million workers. However, if we raise the price up to $7.25, now the demand for workers goes down because they can't pay them, and the supply of labor goes up because more people want to work for that amount of money. So this is where the surplus happens, and really the only way to change the surplus is to either A, increase jobs and shift the demand curve all the way over here, or decrease the supply of labor and decrease the number of people who are working all the way over here, which is kind of hard to do. Okay. Change in supply can also cause the equilibrium to change. And when we say change in supply, we mean a shift in the supply curve. We're not talking about price-related issues. We're talking about shifts in the supply curve due to input costs, production, like technology, increase in suppliers, all of those things that can change supply. So if we have a supply increase, it's going to shift the supply curve to the right. If we have a supply decrease, it's going to shift the supply curve to the left. And when you shift the supply curve to the left, it looks like you're increasing supply. It looks like the supply curve is literally moving up the graph, but you're actually decreasing the quantity supplied. So make sure you remember increase to the right, decrease to the left. When this happens, a new market price must be defined, and the new market price depends on the response of consumers and producers. So it depends on how they want to handle the situation as to where the market price ends up being. Okay, and then the change in demand, which is also, we're referring to a shift in the demand curve, can cause a new equilibrium price. And a shift in the demand curve, remember, can happen because of advertising, demographics, population, income increase. All those things can cause the demand curve to shift. If we have an increase in demand, we shift to the right. If we have a decrease in demand, we shift to the left. And when those things happen, you're going to see the supply and demand curve meet at a new point, which creates a new equilibrium or a new market price. And once again, the market price depends on the response of the consumers and the producers. So with demand, there are these things called fads. And a fad is something that's popular for a very short amount of time, and it's expensive. So we have the demand is really high and expensive, and then all of a sudden it becomes not popular anymore. So the demand drops drastically, and when that happens, the price goes down. So popular expensive goes to not popular cheap. You might be able to name a few, like Silly Bands or skinny jeans or these headphones that everybody's wearing, the big ones, I forget what they're called. Those are all examples of fads. When I was in high school, or actually middle school-ish, it was pleather pants, fake leather. Seriously, I'm not kidding. So why all this fuss about prices? Why does it really matter what the market price is? Who cares? Well, prices are important because they signal the economy. If we start looking at high prices, then that tells us something about the economy. So they're stop and go signals for consumers and producers. If you're a buyer, which is on the demand side, then when you see a high price, that's red to you. You're like, whoa, I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to buy this product. A low price is green. If you are a seller, it's the opposite way around. If you see a low price, then it's the red light. If you see a high price, it's green. You want to sell more. Price is flexible, and because it's flexible, the market can change easily. All of these changes that we just talked about can happen in the marketplace because prices are flexible. They're not set in stone unless the government has instituted a price ceiling or a price floor. So it happens naturally. Sometimes we have a supply shock, and prices have to be flexible in that, because that's whenever we lose supply. We lose a lot of supply, like corn is some bug comes in and eats all the corn, well, we have a supply shock. Prices have to be flexible to respond to that. Rationing sometimes will happen in this case because now all of a sudden we have a shortage, and so we need to tell everybody how much corn they can have at this point. And that, has happened in our country before and during World War II. Unfortunately, this encourages the black market because now people can sell this corn under the table on the black market for a really high price because it's not really available. It also causes the price of the items to go up. Let me put this back on here for just a second so you can get it down. Whoops. Okay, so basically, you got to keep in mind that we can have shortages, but we can't have something like a supply shock that completely wipes out the supply, and now we have a decision to make about how we're going to distribute these goods out, and you can raise the price or you can ration. Okay. A price-based system is the best way to allocate resources without having government control, and when we have a free market or mostly free market like we have in the United States, that's how we distribute items. We set the price. That's how we decide who buys what goods and services, and you guys told me that. Some of you did on your test from Unit 1. And so just keep that in mind, that without prices, we wouldn't really be able to decide who's going to get what items. I mean, it's based on what price you're willing to pay. Okay, so the final thought for this podcast is that the market is constantly trying to meet equilibrium. Changes in supply, demand, price, and government intervention can all change equilibrium. The price that is eventually set sends signals to buyers and sellers. So when you're working on your graphing worksheet, just keep in mind that there are lots of different combinations and lots of different reasons why the equilibrium can change. But analyze your graph. Look at why it's changing. Look at what's happening to demand. Remember, if the demand curve shifts, it has to be because of something other than price. The supply curve shifts, it has to be something other than price. And think, you have to kind of analyze a little bit and think critically about what's going on in the graph to answer the questions on the worksheet. Until next time.